Y'all. One of the components of a harmful or abusive relationship is isolation. And in just a minute, I'll share a couple of examples of it. But it's important to be aware of isolation because if somebody is in a harmful or abusive relationship, becoming isolated increases the other dynamics of the relationship. You once you're isolated, you're only talking to the partner, and it becomes harder to identify or recognize the abuse that's going on. So being isolated is a dangerous place to be, but it's also a place that the person wants you to get to because then they can manipulate and control the relationship more. So anyways, just a little bit of an intro there of why it's important to be aware of it and to try to help be able to spot it. So in my case, I started dating Brock when I was 16, and some of the ways that I became isolated in that relationship was like I played tennis my junior year of high school, and when his last class of the day was near the courts, and we always ran a lap to warm up before we did tennis, and he would get jealous if another boy ran beside me or near me or I talked to them. And so when a friend offered me a job that was at a daycare after school, it was great. It gave me a reason to quit tennis, but it also gave me something to do after school. So now instead of being with friends, I was with a group of 2-year-olds after school, which I loved being around the 2-year-olds, and I was earning money for college the next year. So I didn't really see it, but I did feel a sense of relief in not going to tennis anymore, not doing anything that could potentially make, I was always looking over my shoulder at tennis to see if I was doing something that he might perceive as wrong and get angry over. Another way that it happened was he didn't like me going to the lunchroom. Like I would get in trouble talking to different people, and I never know who I wasn't supposed to talk to. And so instead of going to lunch and meeting up with friends, I worked in the snack bar instead. I'd grab lunch quickly or eat in class beforehand, and then I worked in the snack bar for most of my lunch, unless he and I went off campus for lunch. And then again, there we are, it's the two of us instead of me being with other people and feeling what a healthy relationship feels like. The other way was after we'd been dating, I don't know, a year, probably about a year. Anytime that I did something with my best friend or a couple of my friends, there was always a barrage of questions afterwards. Where did you go? Who were you with? Who did you talk to? Always kind of in an accusatory manner. And this went on for a long time. But after about a year of it, as much as it killed me to do this, I concluded that it was easier not to be friends than to go through this barrage of questions. I wish that I had seen to break up with the boy instead of, walking away from friendships. It killed me to do that. So I became very isolated in this relationship. I withdrew from the youth group that I'd been involved in. I stopped going to the explorers group that I had been part of. I just mentioned that I quit tennis. Now I was working with 2-year-olds. I still wanted friends. And so after I stopped my long-term friendships, I became acquaintances, and one of them invited me to go to a football game one night or, one weekend. And so I went with her, and she was just going with a group of girlfriends. So there wasn't going to be any boys. It felt like it was a safe space. But halfway through the game, Brock came and found me with what felt like a new group of friends, and he asked me to go on a walk with him, and we went under the bleachers, and the same thing happened. He was just accusing me of talking to boys. He was yelling at me. It was awful, and I was embarrassed, and I was hoping that nobody in the bleachers above us could hear us, and I was ashamed to have been yelled at that way, and I didn't want anybody else to witness it. And so, he hadn't told me to leave the game, but I didn't want to run the risk of that happening again during the game or later. And so I went up and I made an excuse of why I needed to leave, and I did. And then, after that, I did have another group of acquaintances. It was somebody that he was a good friend with, and so it was a safer zone. But I never wanted to go out anywhere. I only wanted to be at her house. I didn't want to ever be in a situation where he might perceive that something was going on. And so I just became very, very isolated. I was a shell of a person. I took a lot of babysitting jobs, which is high demand. Being a responsible older teenager, it was easy to get the jobs. But I did that just so I wasn't sitting at home because I couldn't go anywhere else without there being consequences to it. And so that's what isolation looks like in a relationship, is just slowly withdrawing from one thing after another. And you might have reasons for withdrawing, but your world is getting smaller and smaller, and it's a really lonely place to be. And anyways, I'm just sharing this to be able to help people recognize when that happens, or from people outside. If you think somebody is in a harmful or abusive relationship, maybe this will, raise a red flag and conversations there. But always wishing everybody healthy and safe relationships. Take care.